We only got a couple more of these beautiful shows left with the man, the myth, the legend himself, the unicorn that is Phil Steele. Follow him on Twitter, on X, at PhilSteele042. I'm Kyle Schassberger at Kyle Schass, the Lock Doctor, Tripp Hurd, Week 12 edition of the Phil Steele Show. It is here. Phil, 12-6, your power plays over the last 6 weeks. Slight tumble that last week. That's okay. We'll get back on track this weekend, and we'll have those power plays coming up at the end of the show. We're going to go through a couple of dozen, nearly 30 games is what we have on tap. And Phil, I know you hate to comment on this sort of stuff. All you care about is football and the games itself, but my goodness, coming out of Week 11, coaching carousel starting to really pick up and spin. You got the college football playoff rankings, all the implications, but the story's off the field. Phil, do you remember a year like this? Now we've got an alliance between Washington State and Oregon State in the Mountain West, potentially, that is looking to, be affirmed. You have the Michigan sign stealing investigation. There's just something in every pocket of the country when it comes to college football, and not all of it involving the play on the field. I don't remember this much drama away from the field in previous years. Do you?
Yeah, no, I really don't. And, as far as the coaches ones goes, you losing a couple of good friends, whenever they coaches get fired, because I talk to these guys and you sort of hope they stick around, but they'll find other spots, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought of, thinking of Jimbo Fisher for sure. The first guy I thought of beyond Jimbo was you, Phil. I know you always speak so glowingly of him. And, yeah, the relationships certainly impacted for somebody like you and so many others across the industry, families being uprooted, all of that. So it's a business for sure, but this affects people's lives. We might like to talk about it. There might be other talking heads out there that spend more time on it than they should, but still, these are human beings. Okay, look at me. I'm getting sentimental. Tripp, change the mood, because Tripp has a teaser for you, Phil. He's got some brewing. It might be the play of the century. We're going to have to wait until the end of the show. But, Tripp, you were teasing me before we hit record when we were in the hallway just a few short moments ago. You've got some big on tap for Phil.
This is one of the best plays I've ever run across. And I'm telling you right now, I think Vegas has just whiffed on one, but it's coming up. The only problem with this play is the game doesn't kick off until 7:30. So we're going to have to wait a while to collect our money after this one. I wish it was a noon game and we could get it a little earlier, but I am really, really excited about this one.
Let's just hope it lives up to the hype, right, Phil? Let's get to the action. We've got 3 games between now and Saturday, 5 back games already in the book. 1 game on deck on Thursday night, Phil. And this is hard for me. I think it's difficult for you, too. Boston College at Pitt. Panthers are laying 3. 46 is the total, 7 o'clock on ESPN. Pitt gave up 17 passing yards last week, but allowed 382 rushing yards in a 28-13 loss to Syracuse, including 154 yards to a tight end. BC's 5-game win streak dissolved in Hokie land, 48-22. That was at home to the Hokies. Allowed 600 yards of Virginia Tech offense. The question for me is, what does Pitt have to play for? Phil, this is kind of a psychology game, other than maybe some Primanti brothers.
Yeah, and it was interesting. Chris, who works for me here, he was telling me that the Pitt Panthers, he could get a 50-yard line, third row seat for $6 for the Pitt game. So I was like, wow, it's pretty low. So you got to think there's not going to be a great fan base there for Pitt to giving them the home field edge. Both teams were disappointing last week. And Syracuse, Schrader with the shoulder, you knew he wasn't going to throw. I think he threw 2 passes last week. The tight end actually hit 3 of 5 passes last week, and they ran a different type of offense. Boston College is very disappointing at home. I like BC minus the points at home against Virginia Tech last week, and that wasn't even a game. You could shut that thing off in the second quarter. Virginia Tech was dominating. So this is one of those games where, like you said, Kyle, you wonder what Pitt's frame of mind is coming in. You wonder what BC's is. They've got their home field there, or they've got the bowl game clinch. They got Miami on deck. I really don't have a take on this one.
Yeah, Phil, same boat for me last week. I thought Boston College was the play, so that was one of the bigger letdowns there. But moving on to Friday night, we've got USF and UTSA, 2 teams they've never met before. UTSA got off to a really slow start this year, 1-3, but the Roadrunners have won 6 in a row straight up now. They've covered in 4 of those. One of the other ones was a push. You have to think Frank Harris and company are going to have a big night on Friday night, but it's a pretty substantial line here. 15.5, 16 is what I'm seeing UTSA favored by. What do you like here?
Yeah, I like UTSA in conference play, and that's pretty much been the key. They had their non-conference slate; they went 1-3, but then once conference play came, they turned it on. They've had a lot of big leads and let some teams back in, like the North Texas game that you talked about. North Texas getting a late touchdown in that one. So I like UTSA minus the points, but my only concern is they've got a massive game on deck against Tulane. If they beat Tulane next week, they're in the AAC championship game. If they lose to Tulane, they won't be in the AAC championship game. And I think it's regardless of what happens against USF this week. And USF's not a team that's going to just take it lightly and not play. They've got Byron Browns having a pretty good year. It's got an 18-8 ratio. Their defense will give up a lot of yards and points to UTSA. So I'm going to go with UTSA minus the points, but only a slight lean. I'm a little worried about the look ahead to Tulane next week.
All right, one other game on the Friday night slate, 10:30 kick between Colorado and Washington State. We've talked a lot about the struggles for Washington State here over the last couple of months, really, and the Cougs last week, 2 fumbles just really cost them everything against Cal. I think both of them got returned for touchdowns of over 50 yards, so just an absolute killer there. They've now lost 6 games in a row. I don't know if I can bet on the Cougs anymore, but coming into this game against Colorado, they've got a pretty good record against the Buffs, 5-2 in the total of 7 meetings here. What do you like here, Phil?
Yeah, I like Washington State in this one. And, you look at Colorado, they've been pretty much a big underdog in a lot of games and been competitive. They played a really good game against Arizona last week, could easily have won that thing. But when you look at Washington State, while they still have a shot at a bowl, they've got the Apple Cup coming up, but they need to get this one. And Cam Ward's having a decent season with the 20 touchdowns and only 5 interceptions, but they have really been struggling. Now, the good news is I haven't been picking Washington State, so I'm not as bitter about Washington State, over these last 6 weeks. So I think they can turn it around. They're at home. I feel they're the better team. I believe they are a bowl caliber team. I don't think they're going to knock off Washington on the road to get there, but I'm going to go with Washington State minus the points. Better team at home.
For more next level stats, don't forget Phil Steele Plus. More information is available at philsteele.com. They'll peel back the curtain, give you access to all the stats that he uses each week. Bet smarter, not harder. Be more like Phil with Phil Steele Plus. More at philsteele.com. Phil, I would say this is the first game of the day on Saturday, but as we discussed last week, Big Noon Saturday means it's going to be a 12-18, 12-19, closer to 12-20, the kick between third-ranked Michigan, who's favored by 18.5. 50 is the total at Maryland in College Park, 12 o'clock on Fox. No Jim Harbaugh on the sidelines for the second of 3 games here to close out the regular season. That ruling came down after we had our show last week. And Sherrone Moore, my goodness, challenging the FCC after guiding an inspired maize and blue team to a 24-15 win at Penn State. The under did cash, Phil. You were on that. Michigan, 32 straight runs, I think it was, at the end of the game. And Maryland walked off Nebraska to get bowl eligible. If it weren't for the Cornhuskers turning the football over as much as they had, maybe Nebraska would have came out on top. But Maryland is now bowl eligible. They snapped a 4-game losing streak. Can they cover, though, 18.5 at home?
Yeah, tricky situation for Michigan, and the fact they're off Penn State, have got Ohio State on deck. So you talk about a massive sandwich spot. But ironically, just 2 years ago in 2021, they faced the exact same situation. They were off of Penn State, and they had Ohio State on deck. And in that game in 2021, they beat Maryland 59-18. So they handled business. This is a Maryland team that, as you mentioned, just got to be bowl eligible. They came into the year thinking, we want to knock off one of the big boys. We want to get to that level, and it hasn't happened so far. They got blown out by Penn State. The Ohio State game, I like the way they played. Remember, into the third quarter, they were actually leading that game. I thought they outplayed Ohio State at the line of scrimmage the first 2.5 quarters of the game, but haven't been the same since that loss. Haven't really played like Maryland did. So this is a Michigan team that can run the football with Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. And what they said all season long was they're going to keep them fresh, keep their legs fresh. We've seen it emerge. And that's a technically didn't throw a pass the last 34 plays. They threw one. It was called pass interference, so it wasn't a pass, but they did throw one pass their last 34. But they may do that again with Ohio State on deck. I just think Michigan's a better team. They showed 2 years ago they were capable of the cover, and I think they can cover this one.
All right, let's stay in the Big Ten and talk a little Penn State while we're here. Coming off the loss to Michigan, they're back at home this week, favored by 20.5 against Rutgers, the total 41.5. Both of these teams have been pretty good spread teams all year. Originally, looking at the numbers, 41.5, I thought maybe an under's in play here, but James Franklin making the change at offensive coordinator. From what I'm hearing, they're going to try to push the ball down the field a little bit more. Rutgers didn't score last week, but they were playing Iowa, and nobody scores on Iowa. So I'm not going to overreact to that. I don't have a strong lean here, Phil. What do you like in this one?
In this one, I actually like Rutgers. And the reason that I like Rutgers is that if you follow James Franklin and you follow Penn State, you know that after every big loss, they tend to have a lackluster game. Earlier this year, they lost to Ohio State. Next week, got nearly beat by Indiana. Last year, they had a couple of games like that. And if you go back and take a look, head coach Franklin's now 10-24 against the spread off a straight up loss. So there usually is a little bit of a carryover. You expect that here. They've got Michigan State on deck. And as you mentioned, Tripp, Rutgers, probably not as bad as it showed last week. 2 weeks ago, Rutgers held Ohio State to a season low and gained a season high against Ohio State. Last week, it was season lows in both categories against Iowa. So you got to think they'll be better this week. I like Rutgers to keep it closer than expected.
All right, Phil, I'm wearing the polo. I'm repping Tulane, the wave. You know what that means. This is where their fortunes change. I understand Tulane is the team that is 9-1, undefeated in the American. And yeah, as you indicated, this game might not mean as much with what is looming against UTSA next week, but the Wave are just 3-7 against the spread this year. They've won their last 3 games by a combined 7 points. That's 4 straight one-score games, including the 35-28 survival of North Texas. Well, the luck will change. They'll cover the number this week. Tulane is favored by 9.5. Yes, it is sizable considering how close they've been playing their opponents here. 47 is the total, 12 o'clock on ESPN Plus in Boca Raton, but FAU can allow points. Heck, they gave up 22 to ECU last week, Phil, so I think that defense might be the antidote, might be the remedy here to get Tulane moving in the right direction. They gave up 45 a week earlier to UAB, so I like Tulane to cover the 9.5. What do you think?
I'm going to disagree with you on this one, Kyle. I do like FAU plus the points at home. Now, granted, they haven't had as good a season as expected, but if they win their final 2 games, they could still get to a bowl. And following Tulane all season long, I mean, Tulane just gave up 477 yards to Tulsa last week. In fact, they only gained 357. The game of the year for Tulane is next week against UTSA. Doesn't matter what happens this week. What happens next week against UTSA is the big thing. They have not won an American Conference game by more than 12 points all year. FAU is at home, nothing to lose. I think they get FAU's best shot here, maybe a slight look ahead for Tulane. So the fact that it's on the road as opposed to UTSA, which is at home, I like FAU plus the points.
Maybe the moneyline parlay at least, include them in there. The Owls 0-14 when allowing 22 or more points. Worst among non-Power 5 teams.
Oh, 2 quick notes on this game. Tom Herman, horrible as a favorite in his career. Great as a dog, 19-7 against the spread as a dog, and Tulane has lost their last 5 as double-digit chalk. They're almost at double-digit chalk here at 9.5.
All right, let's talk about a fishy line because I've got one for you down in Coral Gables on Saturday. What in the world is Miami doing? And right now, I'm looking at it. I think we had on our doc that Louisville was favored by 1.5. It's actually Miami -1 right now as I look at it. Louisville's a win away from the ACC championship game. They should be undefeated had they not slipped up against Pitt, which still doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I get Miami played well last week on the road at FSU. They had Emory Williams, gave him a little juice at quarterback, but he got hurt, so now it's back to Van Dyke. Here's the thing, though. Louisville has never beaten Miami on the road, and this line, it just screams to take the Hurricanes to me, Phil. What do you think?
Yeah, and I actually like Miami in this game, and I think Vegas is pretty smart with where they put the number on this one. Well, first of all, Louisville. Last week was the first time in the last 16 weeks that the visitor actually covered. And unfortunately, it was against Louisville. Louisville led 14-0 at the half. You're thinking they're on their way to a cover. They scratch out a 31-24 win. But if you go back and take a look at the previous 15 Louisville games, all 15, the home team covered the game. So the home team does well in Louisville games. This year they lost at Pitt. They didn't cover against NC State, didn't cover against Indiana, which was in Indianapolis, didn't cover against Georgia Tech, which was in Atlanta. Now with Miami, you look at their home games. They upset Clemson. They upset Texas A&M. Their only home loss this year, Georgia Tech. And if they take a knee, that's not a home loss. So they could easily have won that. I think Miami's a very underrated team. Their offensive line capable of being a Joe Moore finalist, just missed it by that much, being in the final mix there. And I think Tyler Van Dyke returning to the starting quarterback job will do well. They only had 13 first downs last week, but I like Miami last week plus the points over Florida State, and I like them this week. Pick them or -1 against Louisville at home.
Phil, Northwestern is catching 3 at home against Purdue, and they just made waves on Wednesday night, making David Braun officially the head coach. The interim tag is being removed of a guy who was just on the North Dakota State staff this past summer, came over in July, and man, what a situation that he walked into and inherited with Pat Fitzgerald on the way out and all the chaos swirling around this program. So some good vibes potentially, maybe a monkey being lifted off the shoulders of this program, at least from David Braun's standpoint. Certainly, he's most concerned with winning and helping to develop and be there for these kids, and you've seen it. I mean, he is the first Northwestern coach to win 5 games in his first season since Walter McCornack in 1903. I mean, it's been a while, Phil. That's 120 years. I'm not a math guy, but I can do that math. 120 years. And Northwestern can become bowl eligible. I mean, there's so much positive energy, I think, for the first time maybe all season that has come to light nationally for this program. A moment that they can potentially seize as a 3-point dog. They have lost 3 of 4 straight up, though, in ATS against the Boilermakers.
Yeah, and I think when you take a look at Northwestern, you watch the Rutgers game in the opening week of the season, and right then I think the national narrative was if Northwestern wins 1, maybe 2 tops games this year, and I think they've been an underdog practically in every single game with the exception of Howard. And so getting them to 5-5 at this point is remarkable. But whereas there might have been some luck when they beat Minnesota at home, remember they were down big. Last week, there was no such luck. Ben Bryant returned at the quarterback spot, led 3 touchdowns on the first 3 drives against Wisconsin, and they pretty much controlled that game, winning at 24-10. Purdue had a big game last week. They had over 600 yards against Minnesota. But the one thing about Purdue, you see them have these big games, and then they don't follow it up with another big game. So they only have 3 wins all season. They're going on the road. Northwestern, as you mentioned, the Wildcats needing a win to get to a bowl game. I've been impressed, very impressed. I think Northwestern made a great decision, keeping David Braun, making him the head coach, and I think they reward him here with a victory in a bowl game. And I wonder what the odds were on Northwestern making a bowl game this year at the start of the year. They had to be pretty phenomenal.
All right, here's another team that's really got to win this week if they want to have a shot at making a bowl game, and that's Navy. They've only got 4 wins right now. They're a 3-point favorite at home against East Carolina. Really low total in this game, 31.5. I think it still might be in play. But Navy, to have any shot at a bowl, they've got to win this one because on deck they've got SMU and Army. You can't feel good about their chances about beating SMU. So maybe a slight lean for me here with Navy minus the 3.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a really good game. East Carolina actually has a very good defense, holding opponents to 33 yards per game, below their season average this year. And they usually play pretty good defense against, did last year, played good defense against Navy. So they're getting better and better at defending the option under Coach Houston. And offensively, not wild about what East Carolina's got going on with Flynn and Garcia at the QB spot, and Navy's at home. It's their final home game. So I guess I would slightly lean with Navy, and I do like the under. I was surprised the total was 31.5. This was one where, at the start of the week Tripp, I was thinking, boy, I like the under in that game. And Vegas is pretty smart. They've got that thing at 31.5.
Let's close the loop on the American because we've talked a lot about these teams. It's a log jam. It's crowded at the top between SMU, Memphis, UTSA, and Tulane. We've got another massive one coming up 12 o'clock ESPN2 with Southern Methodist given 8.5 or so. 65.5 is the total. It'll be at the Liberty Bowl. Memphis has won 7 of 9 in the series, 8-1 ATS, as your magazine indicates, Phil. A weird one, too, because as we've talked about, what does this mean for these teams? Is it an elimination game? SMU did not play Tulane, is not playing Tulane this year, and Memphis' one league loss is to the Green Wave. So the loser of this one has no chance. And if SMU can win, then, yeah, they're likely in the AAC title game.
Yeah, absolutely. And, of the two teams this year, Memphis doing a great job. They only have 2 losses all year, as you pointed out, Missouri and Tulane. And the Tulane game, they played really well. They were winning that game at the half and then ended up giving a couple of late scores up and lost by 10, but it was closer than the final in a game they were sort of in control of. But I just have been more impressed with SMU this year. And, SMU in conference play is plus 212 yards per game. Memphis in conference play, despite their winning record, is actually minus 8 yards per game. You look at the Charlotte game, the USF game, the North Texas game, they all were close. North Texas had a big lead and blew it. But they needed a late score to come back and win that one. So this is one of those where while Memphis is great at home, rarely lose at home. Actually, this year they're 0-4-1 against the spread at home. Maybe it's a little bit of the reputation. And just watching the two teams, I think SMU's the better team and will be able to handle this road test. I like SMU minus the points in this one.
All right, let's talk App State and James Madison. This line has been moving quite a bit. I see it opened up with JMU favored by 12.5. Right now, it's down to 9. The total's at 55. JMU 7-3 against the spread. Somebody has to like App State here, though. And I think I like them a little bit, too. They've looked good the last couple of weeks. Pair of nice wins over Marshall and Georgia State. They played JMU close last year. It was 32-28. They only lost by 4. What do you think, Phil? Do the Mountaineers have a shot against JMU?
I was hoping the news for the bowl thing would say James Madison is eligible for a bowl, because then maybe a little celebration. You got game day on hand. Then App State's got a really good shot. And frankly, I'm impressed with App. I mean, they're not a good favorite, but they had been favored in 18 straight Sun Belt games. And now all of a sudden they've been an underdog last week and they won. They're actually 5-0-1 as a dog. So App State, earlier this year, remember they played North Carolina on the road, took them within 6. Whenever you make App State a dog, they're in great shape. So I like that. The thing I don't like is with James Madison not being eligible for a bowl, they're going to be angry. They're going to take it out on somebody. We saw that last year. Remember when they blasted Coastal Carolina? Granted, Coastal didn't have Grayson McCall at quarterback, but they wanted to prove a point at the end of the year, and they did. So that would be my scary part here. I lean with App plus the points just because they're a great dog. And last year's game, if you watched it, I remember watching the game, and in the second quarter, it's just all App State. They're dominating the game, and then you're thinking James Madison's going to get blown out, and they somehow made a comeback and came back and beat them. So App can play with James Madison, but I'm a little nervous about the fact that James Madison did not get picked or is not eligible for a bowl. Might want to take it out on somebody.
Yeah, Jacksonville State, JMU, and Tarleton State, which I hadn't even realized Tarleton State was in that discussion, but all of their waivers were declined to get bowl eligible. So, interesting dynamic there, and we'll see what more comes to that. Again, dealing with the transition to the FBS level. One more to sneak in before we get to the middle portion of the day, Phil, and this comes at 2:30 Eastern. It is 22nd ranked Utah and number 17 Arizona. Ranked on ranked matchup, one of 4 on the weekend. 2 of those coming out of the Pac-12. The other features Washington as a road dog at Oregon State. We'll get to that in a moment. But Utah and Arizona, Wildcats last check favored by a single point, nearly a pick 'em. 45 is the total here. Utes have won 6 straight in the series, covered their last 5. 6 lead changes the last time these two played in Tucson, in a 38-29 win for the Utes 2 years ago. But I love the story of Jedfish. Noah Fafita, 1,735 passing yards, 73% completion, 16 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. Again, stingy defense can be a different test this weekend, Phil. But give me Fish over Witt, Fafita over the Pig Farmer. What do you think?
Wow. When you look at Arizona, great season. I mean, they were like huge underdogs against Mississippi State, Washington, USC. And I love what Coach Fish said, that when they lost to USC by 2, after losing to Washington by 7 and Mississippi State by 7, said, why are we 3-touchdown underdogs in all these games? We're much better than that. They were 3-3, and since then they've been really good. Won their last 4 games, including a blowout win over UCLA and another win at home against Oregon State. So they're playing great. Fafita's playing great. But I just like Utah in this situation for the couple of reasons. First of all, Utah's now the dog, as you mentioned. And when you make Utah an underdog, they are dynamic. 15-3 against the spread as an away dog. We saw them cover at Washington, at USC this year. And also, they're off a loss. They're actually won their last 7 games off a loss, 5-1 against the spread. They've got 3 losses this year. They can't afford another one. They've got the number 1 defense in college football as far as holding opponents to below average, 117 yards per game, below average this year. And I'm actually going to ride with Utah since they're the underdog here, plus the 1 over Arizona.
All right, Phil, that's 2 picks I feel strongly about. You're going against me on. I might have to ride that at the end of the show. We'll see how it plays out.
All right, 3:30 kick in Knoxville between the Dogs and the Vols. A win for Georgia makes it 28 in a row. That would tie the record for longest win streak in the SEC history, and that's a really, really impressive number in the SEC these days. I mean, over the last few years, it's so hard to win in that conference. So what they're doing is pretty incredible. But if you want to find an angle for Tennessee, there are a couple. They're coming off a bad loss, held scoreless in the second half last week on the road at Missouri, and they're very good at home. They've won 14 in a row at Neyland, but I know the rule here. Georgia on the road, we got to roll with the Dogs, right?
Yeah, Georgia's a great away favorite, and they always come well prepared. Tennessee is 9-1 against the spread at home the last 2 years. That's one thing they got going against them. But I think Kirby Smart always finds ways to motivate his team. They were well motivated last week for taking on a top 15 team in Ole Miss, and they'll be motivated here against Tennessee as well. Now, the Vols didn't look good last week. Very disappointing. Horrible second half for them. But Georgia motivated. And then one of the keys, they got their offensive lineman Mims back last week. Mims is their best offensive lineman. He missed 5 games. Having him back, they had over 300 yards rushing, over 300 yards passing. They got some guy, Brock Bowers, that's it. They got him back last week as well. He only had 3 catches, but did get a touchdown. I think he'll be much better this week. And I like the way that Georgia matches up here. So last year, this was supposed to be the showdown. Georgia took care of business at home. This year, I think they could take care of business on the road. I like the Bulldogs as an away favorite.
Science, man. I tell you, it's next level. Tightrope surgery, and there you have Brock Bowers out there, even catching a touchdown pass late in the game. Certainly incredible. Wake Forest and Notre Dame, 19th ranked Fighting Irish off a bye. They had their second bye because they played week 0 against Navy. It's the Sam Hartman Bowl. Sam Hartman, the ACC's all-time leading touchdown getter. He's got 110 for his career, made the decision in the offseason to go to Notre Dame for the extra year. 12,967 yards, 59% completion, and 41 interceptions in 48 games at Wake Forest. Deacs have lost 6 of 7. They're still struggling to replace Sam Hartman. 25, is that right? 24 and a half. That number is massive, Phil. I don't know about it because Notre Dame has underwhelmed at times. However, with Wake Forest in town, Sam Hartman going against his former team, how might that dynamic play into things?
Well, it's not like the team kicked Sam Hartman out, so I don't think he's got an axe to grind with Wake Forest. But the thing I look at in this game was I watched Wake last week. They had in the first half, they had 45 yards, 2 first downs. I don't know how they got them. I was watching. I didn't see. They got them right at the end of the half, I believe, and they were just dominated by NC State. This is going to be their 7th straight week of playing football. They're a tired, beat-up team. They pretty much have lost their goals. They'd have to beat Notre Dame and Syracuse both on the road just to get to a bowl game. They're switching quarterbacks, going to Mitchell Kern. And like I said, that offense last week had 45 yards at the half. They're taking on a really good defense in Notre Dame. Last year, the Irish in the second last game of the season hosted Boston College in their final home game for the seniors. They beat Boston College 44-0. Notre Dame's fresh off a bye. You got Estime running the football against a doable defense. As far as Wake goes, they just gave up 268 yards on the ground to an NC State offense that had been pretty much moribund the previous 2 weeks. So you got Sam Hartman working there. You got the defense. I like the Irish minus the points. I think this could be something like the NC State game last week, except Notre Dame's got more firepower than NC State does, and this one's in South Bend as opposed to being at Wake Forest.
How'd you like to be a Wake Forest fan and a Carolina Panthers fan, huh, Tripp? I mean, my goodness, just inept offensive play. How about them Bears, baby? Not another loss on the schedule. Bring the Lions on.
There you go. Had to find a way to work those guys in there. Good job.
I tell you, the Panthers might be the worst. I was telling Todd this, Phil, before you got on. Panthers might be the worst NFL team I've ever seen. Honestly. Wow. I've seen them in person every single – I went to the game against the Colts. You throw 2 pick sixes. Bryce Young can't see over his line. I saw it in the flesh. Then I'm watching you on Thursday Night Football, and the Bears, outside of allowing the special teams touchdown, I mean, my goodness. I mean, the Panthers are bad. Thankfully, I'm a Bears fan.
I have a question for you, and this will show you my realm of watching NFL football. Who's the head coach of Carolina?
Some
Reich.
guy, yeah.
Frank
Reich, who the Colts the Colts fired them last year. Remember we talked about coaches and how they're just recycled in the NFL? This was another case of it. The Colts fired him. The Panthers saw value in a guy fired in Indianapolis. Let's bring him down to Charlotte. I have no idea what's going on. That's enough NFL. Come on, Tripp.
All right, well, let's pivot to another team that's really struggling to score right now. But they won last week, Iowa. Look, here's a new rule for the show. If Iowa's involved in a game and the total's over 30, let's take the under. That should be an auto play from now on moving forward. And I'll tell you something else, Kyle. I want to shout this out real quick. You put a clip of our show last week, and you even quoted, Tripp thinks the Iowa total that is 29.5 is too high. And I told you the proper line is 22.5. Where did it end up?
22-0.
22 zip. That's right. That's elite level handicapping right here on the Phil Steele Show. This is what you're here for. Phil, another low total, 31.5. My only play has to be the under here. What do you like?
You know, I actually like Iowa. Just like last week, I liked Iowa over Rutgers, and they won the game 22-0. The thing I like, if you're watching the Iowa offense, they've got the run game with Williams and Johnson. The offensive line getting better by the week. And now Deacon Hill actually looked like a quarterback last week. He was just a big guy throwing incompletions prior to that. But last week he had 20 of 31, 223 yards. They were gaining some semblance of receiver. Remember, they lost their top 2 targets at both the tight end. And, of course, that defense is remarkable. They held Rutgers to a season-low 127 yards last week. The interesting thing here is Illinois – 2 weeks ago, they're playing Minnesota, and it's they're losing the game. They're deep in their own territory. I think it was 4th and 14 on their own 3-yard line, and Altmaier gets injured. John Paddock comes in, hits all 4 passes, including a 4th and 14 pass, and they get the touchdown, win the game. And then last week, Paddock throws for 500 yards against Indiana, and this week they're going back to Altmaier. Now, Paddock will still be available if Altmaier struggles, but that's something to watch as the game goes on. Iowa clearly has a better defense here. I think their offense is emerging. So I like Iowa. I believe they're -2.5 or -3 in this one at home to get the win. And I would also, as always, I mean, you hit it perfectly, Tripp. Anytime Iowa plays, you got to play the under until one of their games actually goes over.
There you go.
Ducks have won 11 of 13 against Arizona State. Did not cover against USC last week. But, yeah, that was just a weird game. Like, Oregon's they're still winning and dominant. They might be the most balanced team, right, Phil? Yeah. Like, I don't know what your ratings are telling you, but, I mean, Oregon is so dang impressive. Couldn't cover what was a lofty, 15.5, 14, somewhere around there, more than 2 scores. Could be the most balanced, could be the most complete. This one's got kind of a weird feel, though, too, because of Kenny Dillingham. I mean, he was the former OC at Oregon, spent a year as the QB coach, actually tutored Bo Nix at Auburn as well, was the OC there, helped launch what was an SEC Rookie of the Year season for Bo Nix in 2019 when Dillingham was under Gus Malzahn. So there's some weird, layers and parallels here. And Dillingham spoke glowingly this week at his press conference at Bo Nix. Also Dan Lanning, as you would expect, says Oregon has the best offense since the Chip Kelly era, and even the Marcus Mariota era after that. This might be some reverse juju that Dillingham and this Arizona State team is putting on Oregon. I don't know. The line is 24. It's massive, 54.5 total, 4 o'clock on Fox.
Yeah, I always take coaches' comments about the opposing team after the game because prior to the game, you just blow smoke up their butts all
Hmm.
game long and tell them they're the greatest thing in the world. However, this Oregon team has been number one in my average game grade for the last 4 weeks. I mean, they can run the football. They average 6.1 yards per carry. They can throw the football. I'm still saying Bo Nix wins the Heisman this year. We'll see a couple weeks from now when he beats Michael Penix head to head in the Pac-12 title game. But he's got a 29-2 ratio. You look at the defense; they've got one of the top defenses in the country, holding opponents to 114 yards per game below their season average. This is really a complete team in Oregon, but they are off USC. A little disappointed in that game against USC. They're up by 15. They miss a field goal, which would have put them up by 18. Then they give up a backdoor touchdown to USC. Could have covered, but they've got the Civil War on deck as well against Oregon State. And Arizona State, you talked about the fact that their head coach and Kenny Dillingham knows Oregon's personnel inside and out. And last week, I got to hand it to Coach Dillingham. I mean, they're just beat up on the offensive line. They're missing like their five top offensive linemen. And what they did last week, they ran the swinging gate. They ran all kinds of weird stuff. They had Scatabo at quarterback. It was just a fun game to watch if you like
That's
watching.
my guy. It's the Schass All-American, Scatabo.
Yeah, he played well. And I just think they're scrappy. So this is one of those games where there's no way I'm betting against Oregon. But in this situation, I'm not betting against Arizona State either. So I'm staying away from this one. Kyle, you got a pick on this one?
Oh, I'm going to go with Dillingham. I think Arizona State covers. And it's very, for all the reasons we've laid out, but, the two teams that Oregon and Arizona State beat last week, and ASU, unexpectedly, are going to play each other coming up next, which Tripp will tee up. But, I think Oregon will win by 3 scores, but 24, I mean, give me ASU. I think ASU is a smart pick.
It's steep. It's a steep line for sure.
Yeah, and it's in Tempe. Come on.
I do love the confidence, though. They're going to beat Washington here in a couple of weeks. Phil, you love the Ducks. You believe in them?
Yeah,
and I do too. I think they're really good.
I just put the Vegas power ratings up on Twitter or whatever X or whatever you call it nowadays. And if Oregon played Washington right now on a neutral field, Oregon's a 6-point favorite.
Wow. Okay.
6-point favorite. That would be December 2nd, the Friday in Vegas? No, December 1st. Pac-12 has a standalone game on Friday night. I don't know. The MAC might be Friday night too, but Friday night on December 1st, it would be in Vegas. Phil has Oregon as a 6-point favorite over Washington. Awesome. We're that close.
Yep, we are right around the corner. All right, let's stay out west. We've got UCLA making the long trip down the street to USC. This is weird because it's the last time these two are going to meet as Pac-12 opponents. I still can't wrap my head around some of the stuff that's happening in college sports right now. USC coming into this one as a 6.5-point favorite. The total at 65.5. Could we see Dante Moore come back for this game? We don't know yet. Nothing's confirmed. But if he does, maybe it's been a benefit for him to sit for a couple of weeks, be able to watch 2 or 3 games and come back in and bring a little juice to the offense for UCLA. I don't have a strong lean here. Nothing really would surprise me. I could see UCLA coming out, playing great defense, keeping this game in the 50s or 60s, and coming out with an outright win. That wouldn't shock me, but it's not going to shock me if it gets on up into the 60s or 70s and USC wins by a couple touchdowns. Do you have a lean here, Phil?
What's the total, Tripp?
65.5.
Okay. Yeah, I would probably lean with the over, I think. First of all, I want to say that I love watching this game. You got both teams with their home uniforms.
Yeah.
It's the color, and it's just, I love it. I love watching this game every single year. And it's been pretty competitive if you go back and look at the last couple of years as well. UCLA has the clear defensive edge. Now, I think their offense will be improved. I got a little inside info. I'm talking to Wayne Cook, who we do the podcast with every Tuesday night for Wednesday. And he said Garbers could play, Moore could play. And in fact, he thinks one of the two will be there. And frankly, they didn't have good quarterback play last week. And they lost to Arizona State. And USC, I mean, they could score on anybody. They got that late score against Oregon. And then their defense will let anybody score as well. They've given up 533 yards per game. So I think over might be your favorite play in this one, just for the fact that these two teams usually light it up when they play. slight lean with USC to win it by about 7, but I think the spread's accurate.
Tremendous uniform game. I'm with you, Phil. Both wearing their home uniforms, aesthetically pleasing, as they would put it. And
Yes.
Tripp, when you frame it that way, it's the last meeting as Pac-12 opponents. A lot of us, and I know Phil was one of those guys, they don't think about all that extra stuff. They're just thinking about these two teams meeting. But yeah, it is mind-boggling when you put it in those terms. All right,
They will be Big Ten opponents, though.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
But it's not like the series is ending.
That's correct. Yeah, unlike some of the other rivalries, but yeah, just under a different umbrella, if you will. All right, Duke going to Charlottesville, taking on Virginia. Blue Devils favored by 3.5. 47 is the total. 3:00 on the CW. Duke ended a 7-game slide against Cavaliers last season, both straight up and against the spread. Last week, Phil. And I know I was on Duke, you were on Carolina. It was a sizable spread. It went the way of I, but it was a very bizarre game because it was not in question really until the fourth quarter. And then the Blue Devils were playing more than a team in Carolina blue last week. When you talk to most anyone around these parts, it was those striped in white and black as well. I mean, some of these calls, the shenanigans going on, the lack of review. It was just hard to stomach. Hard to really put into focus. And now you got Duke as a favorite. Yeah, criminal would be another way to put it. But Duke is a favorite going up against a Virginia team. We've talked about them each of the last few weeks, Phil. They're playing much better, much more competitive squad.
Yeah, I thought the key, if you're watching the game, I felt really comfortable about North Carolina. But every time they got in the red zone, field goal, field goal, field goal, field goal, field goal. Would they have 6?
Yeah.
They punched some of those in for touchdowns. It would have been a completely different game. They would have been in control. They didn't do it. And then, as you mentioned, Duke almost came back and won that game, taking the lead late and forcing North Carolina to come down. It was just a very entertaining game. Now, here's a stat that really surprises me. Virginia comes in with just 1 ACC win. Duke's got a good record this year. They already have 5 wins this year. But on the season, in conference play, Virginia is minus 20 yards per game. Now, that's better than you would expect, right? But Duke is minus 107 yards per game. That's a lot worse than what you think of when you think of Duke. So Virginia is actually the better team statistically. They're at home. The last 5 times they played Duke at home, they've not only won all 5 straight up, they've won all 5 against the spread. This is a scrappy Virginia team. And even with Calandria playing quarterback last week over Musket, I thought they played a really good game against Louisville. They looked like they were on the precipice of getting blown out at the half as well, 14-0 Louisville. And then they rallied to come back and win that one. So I'm going to go with Virginia plus the points. If they were favored, I'd probably like Duke. But that stat of the Duke being minus 107 yards per game in ACC play, Virginia minus 20, and the Cavs winning the last 5 at home. I like the Cavs plus the points in a possible upset.
Yeah, you removed the Georgia Tech blowout, Tripp. It's a combined 10 points that they've lost by, too, taking to Miami to OT, and then the Wahoos as 24-point underdog. Don't forget, winning in Chapel Hill over Carolina.
Yeah, and especially in this game, if you can get that hook, that 3.5, that might come into play. That's a really good number right there. I like Virginia, too. And staying in the ACC, we've got NC State taking on Virginia Tech. I have no clue what to expect out of either one of these teams anymore. We've already mentioned it. We all like Boston College last week. Virginia Tech just goes in and runs them out of the building. So they surprised us last week. NC State has surprised me for 3 weeks in a row now, because if you watched the Wolfpack just get thumped on the road at Duke, 3 or 4 weeks ago, and since then they've turned it around. They beat Clemson. They beat Miami. Both of those games were at home, but then they go on the road last week, a really impressive win at Wake Forest in a game that was expected to be really close. They win by 20. This one's a hard one for me to get a feel on here.
Yeah, and this one I actually like Virginia Tech. Now, last week I pointed out that Tech dominant at home, winning their games by 15 points per game, outscoring teams or outgaining teams by 150 yards per game. but not good on the road. Well, they proved me wrong by beating Boston College up last week. As mentioned, you could shut that thing off in the second quarter. You knew it was over. Kyron Jones has been a dynamic impact for them. They've got Tootin at running back, and that defense just plays with a different level at home. Enter Sandman, all that stuff. NC State, the wins over Clemson and Miami of Florida, they were actually outgained or out first down 40-21, almost 2-1 first down deficit. And then last week they dominated Wake Forest, but Wake is not playing to the level of a big boy, and Virginia Tech is. They're actually still up there in the mix for the ACC. They've only got 2 losses this year. Could somehow sneak in there if things broke their way. I just think in Blacksburg, I'm going to take Virginia Tech. They beat Syracuse by 18. They beat Wake Forest by 17. They beat Pitt by 17. They've been dominant at home. They're getting more and more confidence each week with Jones. And I'm not wild about Brennan Armstrong. I know he looked good last week against Wake, not dominant. The defense was dominant, but I actually like VT minus the 3 at home.
UNLV at Air Force. Falcons are laying 3, 47 the total, 3:30 on CBS Sports Network. Air Force has won 10 of 12, including 5 straight against UNLV, Phil. But, it's a pair of 8-2 teams on the surface. Looks like it should be, highly competitive, meaningful contest for both sides. But this thing has been bet down massively because my records show that this thing opened up at 9.5 with Air Force as a favorite back on late Saturday, early Sunday. Now it's down to 3.5. That makes more sense because the Falcons have lost back-to-back games. You had the one against Army when they were a heavy favorite, and that was at home, and then on the road at Hawaii, inexplicably, as a double-digit favorite. So all of a sudden, the last 2 weeks, I don't know what to think of Air Force.
Yeah, and the key is, will Air Force hold on to the ball? The last 2 weeks, that's been the key. They actually had the first down edge in both those games you talked about, had the yardage edge in both those games. They were -6 in turnovers against Army and followed that up with -4 in turnovers against Hawaii. How often does a team go -10 in turnovers in a 2-week span, especially a disciplined team like the Air Force? So you wonder what's going to happen here. They gave their opponents a lot of extra possessions, clearly could have won both those games had it not been for the turnover, but did lose them. But you wonder about their frame of mind, how they're playing coming into this, and will UNLV take advantage? And UNLV's been a spread darling. Tripp was on them, remember, a couple of weeks ago talking about how they were one of the best spread teams in the country. They did lose that game to Fresno State, but other than that, they pretty much have covered every game this year. I love the way that Jaden Maeva is playing at the quarterback spot, and they're a team playing with a lot of confidence. I put it at Air Force 3, and that's about where the spread is. So to me, this is a toss-up game that I'll watch and maybe learn a little, and we'll see if Air Force can actually hold on to the ball.
All right, let's go to the Big 12. UCF on the road at Texas Tech. Red Raiders favored by 2.5. The total's at 59.5, and I do think we could see some points in this one. Another note, both teams can get bowl eligible here with a win. They're both sitting at 5 right now, and both coming off good wins. Texas Tech on the road last week, getting it done at Kansas. UCF just dominated Oklahoma State last week in a line I think we talked about. I wasn't really sure. It didn't make a lot of sense, but makes a little bit more sense now. But UCF 8th in the country in total yards on offense against a Texas Tech team that seems to score a lot more points when they're at home. So I like the over here, Phil. What's your read on this one?
Yeah, clearly I like the over. I think that's the best play here. Remember, UCF was without John Rice Plumlee for a few weeks, and that's why they weren't scoring up to their normal average. They've got John Rice Plumlee back, 45 points last week against Oklahoma State. Texas Tech was down to their third-string quarterback, Jake Strong, for a couple of weeks. Guess what? Baron Morton is back and looking good. You hit it right on the head. Texas Tech at home averages 35 points per game. On the road, they average 23. So let's give Texas Tech 35. I think John Rice Plumlee could take this thing right to the wire with them. You've got a very explosive UCF offense. Clearly, to me, if you're going to bet this game, I think over is your best play here.
All right, let's get to the evening slate. Phil, Sunflower Showdown is going to kick us off with the Wildcats having won 14 straight meetings in this series. They're favored My 8.5 points at home. 57 is the total. 21st ranked Wildcats hosting in the Little Apple. Number 25 Kansas. 11 of 14 against the spread too that K-State has claimed. Last Jayhawks win in Lawrence, 2008. Cole Ballard or Jason Bean? We've got questions now at quarterback for Kansas. It was Ballard making his first career start under center in the loss against Texas Tech, a walk-off fashion to the Red Raiders last week. Stable Force, meanwhile, a quarterback for K-State, and I think that's where I would lean here with 8.5. It might be sizable, more than a touchdown, but, I mean, Will Howard, now more touchdown passes than anybody in K-State history of 45.
Yeah, I've been handicapping football professionally since the 80s. And it's an automatic play every year. Just take Kansas State over Kansas, going back to Bill Snyder's days when he would just dominate his rival. Now, I want to correct you on one thing, Tripp. Last week, Jason Bean started the game, got injured on I believe it was the second series, and they were forced to go with Cole Ballard the rest of the game. It was a concussion, I believe, but Bean threw the ball in practice on Wednesday and should play here. So I do expect Jason Bean to play, but that doesn't change my opinion. I think Kansas State's a better team. They clearly have the better defense, holding opponents 57 yards per game below their average. I do like Will Howard and Avery Johnson, the change of pace quarterback they can use, who is one of the highest rated quarterbacks out of high school. They've got the offensive line advantage, and they've got the running backs with Giddens and Ward. I just feel K-State's a better team. And last year, I like K-State in the game over Kansas. They ended up winning that one 47-27 at home. I don't think it'll be as big of a blowout, but the spread's very manageable for a Kansas State-Kansas game. And Tripp, you did hit it right on the head. 14-0 straight up, 11-3 ATS in the series over the last 14 games.
I'll give you the credit for that, Kyle. That was
yeah. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to. I mean, this might be game of the week right here. Washington and Oregon State. The Beavers. If you're wondering why they're favored over an undefeated Washington team, it's because they just never ever lose at Reser Stadium, and that's where this game is. Originally, I did like Oregon State here. I'm backing off a little bit over the last couple of days. I just keep thinking about, Washington's got a lot of big game experience going up against Oregon, going up against USC. And they've also been in some really bad spots this year, like that Arizona State game where they just could not get anything going. They just had to find a way to win. But a tight line here against Oregon State, it's going to be tough for the Huskies to come out of there with a win. What's your read on this one, Phil?
Yeah, once again, Vegas knows what they're doing. They've got Oregon State the favorite, which surprised me at the start of the week. I was hoping to get Oregon State as a home dog. I would have loved it. It was one of my top 10 plays, under the radar. Nobody's expecting them to win. But now you've made Washington the underdog. So believe me, they'll be talking about the fact that they're undefeated. One of the top teams in the country. And I don't look at the rankings, so don't even tell me. I don't know where they're ranked in the playoff rankings. Doesn't matter. Whoever wins the Pac-12 would be in it, I feel. But anyway, as far as this game goes, that does have an impact. But I believe it's 17-1 straight up and against the spread in Reser Stadium. The last couple of years, this place been under construction, hasn't even been to full capacity. They're full capacity this year. I just have to take Reser Stadium. I'm going to go with the Oregon State Beavers to win this one at home, but it won't be one of my top 10 plays just for the reasons you mentioned, Tripp.
No, very understandable. And another game in the Big 12 this week that I really wanted to get your opinion on, because these are two teams, Texas on the road at Iowa State. I know you've really liked Iowa State here lately, but you've been on the Longhorns quite a bit here in recent weeks too. Last week, the thing that killed me, Iowa State, you just scored too many points. I love the under in that game with BYU. I thought they might just hold BYU scoreless, but you love that side with Iowa State. I think they were giving up like 7.5 or 8, and you love the Cyclones last week. That was definitely the play on this one. What do you like here between the Cyclones and the Longhorns in town this week?
Yeah, and I think one of the key reasons for me in this game happened right at the end of the Texas game last week. Jonathan Brooks limped off the field, and guess what? He's out for the year. Jonathan Brooks has been a key cog in that Texas offense, averaging 6.1 yards per carry. You look at C.J. Baxter. He's a very good back. He'll have success, but he's only averaging 4.4 yards per carry. So not having Brooks, I think, takes a little bit away from that Texas offense. And the thing with Texas, they just let teams back in the game. I mean, Kansas State, they're totally dominating. And then all of a sudden, K-State's back in it. Last week against TCU, it's 26-6 at the half. They got a 331 to 110-yard edge. Guess what? At the end of the game, they need a fourth down conversion just to hang on and win the game. Iowa State's very dangerous. I love the way this team is playing. Remember at the start of the year, they lost their quarterback, they lost their running back, they lost their first two games or three. They were actually 2-3 at one point, but they're playing great ball since then. The Kansas game, a little bit of a head scratcher. They lost that one at home. I thought the return touchdown did them in there. But this is an Iowa State team that can beat teams at home. I like you talked about the hook before, Tripp. I like the 7.5 here. Anything over a touchdown's gravy. I like Iowa State plus the points and a possible upset.
126th installment of the big game, Cal at Stanford. Golden Bears have won 3 of 4, including a big comeback last year. I say big. It was 27-20, I think, if I recall. But Cal won 41-11 the last time that they played on the farm a couple of years ago. Can the Cardinals slow down Jaden Ott, who had secured his 19th 1,000 rushing yard season? Not his, but 19th rushing yard season, 1K in Cal Golden Bears history, and a win against Wazoo. Last week, Cal comes in favored by 6.5. 55.5 is the total, 6:30 on the Pac-12 network.
Yeah, it's going to be a battle against that home crowd, huh, Kyle?
Yeah, I think so. It's going to be feisty. It's going to be feisty on the farm.
Yeah. I don't expect much of a home advantage at all for Stanford in this one. And I got to say, Stanford has been playing a lot better down the stretch. That Washington State win, impressive. Almost knocking off Washington, impressive. So they have been playing well. But this is a game Cal needs if they want to still have a shot to get to a bowl game. They need to win their final 2. I do think Jaden Ott has a good game here against the Stanford rush defense. That last week just gave up 277 yards on the ground, 6.9 yards per carry. Mendoza's looking better by the week at the quarterback spot. They got a big win over Washington State last week. And like I said, the home crowd edge is not going to be very much at all for Stanford. So I'm going to go with their nearby rival Cal to come out of here with the win by more than 6.5.
We're going to move past Boise State and Utah State. We had it on the dock, but Phil, I know you don't feel strongly about either. It's hard when you let your coach go in Avalos. So, again, anything can happen in that contest. Broncos are actually favored by 3.5 on the road, taking on Utah State, 7 o'clock, CBS Sports Network. Let's move to let's go to Columbia. South Carolina hosting Kentucky. Wildcats of UK are laying 1. They are a road favorite. 54.5 is the total. 7:30 on SEC Network. UK has lost 4 of 5. Phil, it's a team that is really reeling, for lack of a better word. UK, though, 6-1 when they're rushing for 100-plus yards in a contest, 0-3 when they don't. South Carolina's allowed 100 yards on the ground all but 3 games this season, but the Gamecocks score at home. They might not score away from Williams-Brice Stadium. They've failed to score 20 on the road, but they score at least 37 every time at home this year. I'm leaning South Carolina as a home dog. If they're going to be a home dog, I'm going with the Gamecocks. What do you think?
I agree with you 100%, Kyle. Nice call there. And I love what you pointed out about the home scoring. They average 42 points per game at home, just 16 on the road. And while South Carolina has given up over the 100-yard barrier in those games, they're only giving up 3.7 yards per carry. I like that. That's a good rush defense. Just that teams have been running the football on them a lot. You look at South Carolina, you go, hey, they're minus 62 yards per game in SEC play. Well, guess what? Kentucky's minus 72 yards. And South Carolina was all beat up after that Texas A&M game. Prior to that, they had gotten beat up. But they just played Jacksonville State and Vanderbilt, and they weren't tested very much. They were able to ease up in both games. So I think we're going to see a fresh, ready South Carolina team that still has a shot at bowl eligibility. I agree with you 100%, Kyle.
All right, Tripp's got his big play of the century. Come on, Tripp.
I got to hear it.
You guys ready for this?
Waiting all show.
I'm just going to keep it short and simple for you. I will stake my entire reputation on this game right here. Nebraska at Wisconsin, under 36.5. I'm surprised if this game even gets past 10. I think we could see maybe like a 6-3 final. I think the under's the lock here, Phil.
Yeah, it sounds like a good play to me. And how can I argue with that? I would say if you made the total 10, I would take the over.
Tough to go against that. But, I mean, look, Wisconsin, all 3 losses. They're averaging about 11 points a game over the last month. I watched them against Ohio State. I loved them against Ohio State, and they did cover. But if their offense could have done anything, they would have had a shot to win that game outright. But Braylon Allen still not healthy. They tried to bring him back. It looked like it was too soon. So I love the under in this game.
Yeah, the Ohio State game, I think, changed in the second half when Braylon Allen and DK went out. Their top wide receiver went out with injuries, and haven't been the same since then. So their offense has been stagnant. And Nebraska, in my mind, is a pure under team. They have a great defense. The key is going to be if Jeff Sims starts. I mean, how many turnovers can this guy have in a season? And that's really been their problem when they turn the ball over. But yeah, I agree with you 100% there, Tripp. Good call.
Yeah, that's a good question for Stephen Hartzell. He's got a lot of Jeff Sims experience being a Georgia Tech fan. All right, let's quickly, late night chasing. We've got 2 games I'll tee up for you here, Phil. Just tell me which one you like. New Mexico at Fresno State. Fresno is favored by 23.5. And then another 10:30 kick, San Diego State on the road at San Jose State. San Jose 14.5. They're favored in that one.
You know, ironically, both those games made my Phil Steele Plus tour. So check out the tour. It's up and available now with guaranteed winners. You have to have a winning week or you get my Inside the Press Box newsletter next week, a $20 value free. But both those games are on there. The stronger one, though, is probably the New Mexico game. I like New Mexico plus the points. Complete reasoning on it right there on my Phil Steele Plus tour.
Phil Steele Plus Tour, you heard it right there at Phil Steele 042. With San Diego State, again, another coaching situation with Brady Hoke announcing his retirement on Monday. 7th winningest coach all time in Aztecs history. So some things to watch for. Not as many games on the palette late night. I think it was 5 after 10 o'clock Eastern last week. Let me give you a sick pick, Phil, before I get your power plays, your 3 best plays of the week, and then we'll get you out of there. Indiana at home against Michigan State. I'm going to go there. Sam Houston State didn't cash for me last week, 7.5-point dog at Louisiana Tech. But Indiana, if they're a 4-point favorite, even 3.5, as I see in some places, these 2 teams are combined 2-12 in the Big Ten, combined 6-14 overall. Indiana's at home. I think the Hoosiers take care of business, bouncing back after a wild game against Illinois last week. So I like Indiana at home.
I agree with you 100%. I like Indiana as well. That's a good call. Tom Allen's doing a hell of a job getting this team to play. And Sorsby, since they've switched their offensive coordinator and gone to Sorsby a quarterback, they've been a lot more productive. So good call on that. For my 3, I'm going to go with Utah over Arizona. I'm going to go with New Mexico. Make sure you check the Phil Steele Plus tour and listen why. I got a lot of good reasons. Then I'm going to go with Iowa. I think the line's cheap. They're playing Illinois. And yes, I know they lost Cooper DeJean, their top defensive player. He's out for the year with injury. But this is an Iowa team that it's next man up with them, and they will take care of business at home.
Tripp, anything you'd like to add?
I mean, I've not to put all my eggs in one basket with the under between Nebraska and Wisconsin. I'm kind of piggybacking off Phil here, but I like Rutgers with all those points too.
Makes sense. I got so much chicken scratch. Again, that's back-to-back weeks of things that I like, dislike, based on what Phil has said. You pay more. Not that I don't pay less attention early in the year, but look, we only got a couple of weeks left here. I'm trying to make up for a couple of bad decisions earlier in the year. Give me South Carolina at home, though, as the 1.5-point underdog against Kentucky. I like Georgia Tech, a game we didn't talk about, 6.5-point favorite at home against Syracuse. 2 strong rushing teams, but Georgia Tech's got Georgia on deck at home. They're not winning that game. They need this one to get to bowl eligibility. Be the first time since 2014, I believe, that they've done so, at least a handful of years. And then Virginia Tech at home, -3 against NC State. So those are my favorites. Make sure you check out Phil Steele at Phil Steele 042. You got the Phil Steele Plus tour on YouTube available there for you on Twitter, on X. The Lock Doctor as well, prescribing winners as always at Tripp Hurd. I'm at Kyle Schass. Phil, that's week 12. All right, we're going to come back to the table for week 13. Thanksgiving next week. You love stuffing, as do I. So we're stuffing guys. I love that about you.
Yeah, I love it. It's a just give me a bowl of stuffing and I'm good with the Thanksgiving dinner. That's all I need.
Absolutely. Tripp, we'll talk to you next week, all right? We're going to come a day early is the plan on Wednesday. So bet smarter, not harder. Be more like Phil. Go to philsteele.com for more information. This has been The Phil Steele Show.